Welcome to Elixir Mix, your weekly Elixir podcast, talking with members of the community. My name is Mark Ericksen. On our panel today, we have Michael.
Hey, everybody.
Josh.
Yo.
And today we're joined with a special guest, Eric Oestrich.
Hello.
He's joining us. He's been a previous guest. And today we're all joining together to welcome a special guest, Adolfo. Adolfo, could you say hi and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Adolfo Neto. I'm a professor at Brazilian University, the Federal University of Technology in Paraná, Curitiba, Paraná. And also I'm a fan of the Elixir programming language.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io.
Great. And so we wanted to have you come and talk about like the Elixir Brazil conference, and I believe you spoke there as well. And we'd love to hear just kind of think about technology in Brazil with Elixir, with your experience with it. So why don't you first just kind of give us a little background on what you presented on at the conference, then we can start talking about the conference.
So I presented a talk about the Elixir community of practice. It's because as you know, as I have already said, I'm a professor. So I don't spend my professional time programming. I do what I can. But I started to see that there is a lot of things going around the Elixir community. There is podcasts like we are here. I believe there are others podcasts. I know there are other podcasts, and also there is the Elixir forum and the live coding, and it's a lot of things happening. And I remember when I was a student a long time ago, there wasn't this kind of thing for programming language, especially new programming languages, small programming languages like, the Elixir community is still quite small, even in Brazil, where it's, I believe the Elixir community in Brazil is bigger than in other countries because the creator, José Valim, is Brazilian. But so I was fascinated by everything that was related to the Elixir community. And in my research time, that as a professor, I have to teach, I have to manage students, and I have to have some time to do research. And I said, let me study the Elixir community of practice. And I use this expression, Elixir, the community of practice, because it's a term that is used. It is used in research to represent a group of people that share a common interest and that interacts to produce nice things like this podcast and blog posts and everything else. That was my talk at the Elixir Brazil 2019.
So I'm really fascinated by you have a very different perspective on the Elixir community than almost anyone else that I've ever talked to. So I'm a little bit curious, you talked a little bit about what made you interested in learning more about the community, but as you started to study it, what did you find? Is there a reason that the Elixir community is producing more of these, podcasts and forums and blog posts? Do you think that there's a reason for that, or do you think that that producing those things will create a certain outcome for the community?
Yes, I cannot say right now. I'm just in a stage where I'm just doing a characterization. So I use the term participant observer. So I'm mostly an observer because I'm kind of outside. I'm not a software developer, but I'm also a participant because I'm going to events. Now I'm a co-organizer of the local meetup, and I gave talks about Elixir here at my university. So what I'm trying to do right now is just to characterize. I plan in the future to try to raise some hypotheses and to test them to see if they are true or not.
One of the questions I had was any background you've had with other communities out prior to Elixir. And I'd really be curious to hear your perspective on how they are similar or different. Like how might the Elixir community be different from another community you've examined in the past?
Yes, I have never studied in as much detailed other communities as I have studied the Elixir community. But I have spent 1 year at North Carolina State University, and while I was there in Raleigh, North Carolina, I went to a lot of meetups, mostly meetups related to the Agile community, and also some meetups related to the Ruby community. Yes, there is a strong Ruby group there, and also I went to the Clojure meetup there in Durham. Durham is close to Raleigh. I also went to Clojure Conj 2014. It's a big conference for Clojure developers. So what I could see is that compared to these other communities, I think the Elixir community is smaller, but it produces a lot of things, a lot of blog posts and videos and talks and events, but I'm not sure. I cannot say why this happened. Right now I can only say that this is happening. There is a lot of things happening, but I don't know why. What's the motivation behind all these things that happening in the Elixir community?
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that you attended school in Raleigh, North Carolina, because one of the things I think people may not be aware of is that it's kind of considered the research triangle. You have Durham, Raleigh, and Chapel Hill. And I had very strongly considered moving there when I was in Alabama, in an area that was very much dominated by, at the time, it was and everything Microsoft in terms of tech. Like you really couldn't get a job doing anything else. And
there's still a lot of that.
Yeah. Oh, it's so sad. But yeah, so I'd really strongly considered moving to Raleigh and Durham area just because they had such a great Ruby community, and this was years ago. So we'd love to hear from the audience, like if there are meetups and things anyone would like to kind of raise awareness for in those areas, especially around Elixir. But yeah, so I would love to. So I'm curious about your experience in the U.S. Did you enjoy it here?
I loved this research triangle area. It's great because it's not so dense, such a dense populated area compared to the place where I live, because I live in a very crowded urban area. And I was there mostly because I'm a professor here, and there is this professor at NC State. They call the university NC State there. That's Laurie Williams. Laurie Williams is a pioneer in Agile software development. She wrote a book a long time ago about pair programming. So that's what I went there. I went to be part of her research group, and then she told me, go, you like this. At the time I was very interested in coding dojos, And I was planning to maybe to organize some coding dojos there, but then she said, go to those meetups, those groups of, there's these groups of professionals interested in some specific area. And I went to the Azure, as I said, the Clojure, Python, Ruby, even Java. There was a Java. There was even one on PHP, because I mean, PHP is kind of dying language. I'm not sure, but so it was very interesting to get to know that. I mean, as a professor, and sometimes I teach things to students that are not that interested. And these people, they work 40 hours a week, and they find some time to watch a talk by someone about the thing that they are working. This was kind of very interesting for me.
So I'm very interested in your experience with the Clojure community. That was a big part of me coming to Elixir, is that I was primarily Ruby developer at the time, and I started to watch Rich Hickey talks, and I got very interested, and pretty soon was watching all the Clojure Conj videos that were released, and I became very interested in hearing the work that was going on there and how they were finding these common problems that showed up over and over in programs written by teams of people. And they tried to find better ways to structure their code or their tools that help to eliminate those. And I realized that this research happens in a lot of other places, by the way, but for me, that was one of the first places where the research had application directly on the things I was working on a day-to-day basis. It felt really exciting, and it got me excited about functional programming in particular. And then I kind of discovered Elixir and rediscovered Erlang. And so I'm very interested that you are going to have this chance to compare the Elixir community to your experience with the Clojure community and these other programming communities, because I think all of them shared that very open source tradition where, like you said, you have some day-to-day job where you're shipping features, you're fixing bugs. Oftentimes those jobs can include PagerDuty and things that add stress. But even so, the people in those careers, they find extra time just because they enjoy the pursuit of excellence in software. And I think that I'm very interested to see how that plays out over the next decade, because open source has so far had a very interesting trajectory where in the early days it was kind of anti-corporations, right? It was kind of Microsoft versus the Linux Foundation in a way, or the GNU Foundation. And now the two seem to be working in a more harmonious way, where companies employ people who spend their time working in open source. So maybe the two are learning to work together better. And I'm curious to see how that will play out in the future. But one thing I was particularly curious about that you might have some knowledge about is, what does the Elixir community look like in and around Curitiba? Are there a lot of companies that are hiring Elixir developers? Is there a lot of professional things going on? It sounds like there's a meetup. You helped organize a meetup, so there's some of that kind of community. What other community things are happening in where you live?
So there are some companies here that use Elixir in production, like I think BigReady and Pipefy. I'm not sure what's the name of the other one, but I can remember at least three. I tell you where, and there has been maybe, it's not yet a regular monthly meetup, and I think there is, the last meetup was 4 months ago, but I have some plans to maybe do some things here at the university as a way to maybe attract my students, the university students to Elixir. And it's still, of course, it's still quite small when compared to other languages. It's much easier to find a job here if you know Java or even Ruby. but it's growing. It's growing, and it's as these companies, some of these companies are hiring. Maybe it will grow even more. I mean, Curitiba is not a city as big as São Paulo, because the Elixir Brazil 2019 event happened in São Paulo, which is a metropolitan area that has maybe 20 million inhabitants. It's huge. And they have an Elixir user group there. That's also, they have regular events, small events. And here in Curitiba, we have only 2 million inhabitants. And so we are starting to see more tech companies here. But it's also, it's growing. The market for software developers in general here, it's growing, and there's just a small percentage of these companies are using Elixir.
For any of our audience who are Portuguese native speakers or otherwise live in Brazil, is there a place where they could go to find some of the presentations that like your presentation? We will include that in the show notes, but they might be interested in taking a look at some of the other conference talks. Is there a good place where they can go to see those?
Yes, I see that you have the link for my post. I wrote today a post, a brief recap of Elixir Brazil 2019, and there I put the links to all the slides that I know. I think the Elixir Brazil site has links to some slides, because we had a problem. It's a small problem because it's not the Elixir community is not rich. I mean, it's there's no big company behind Elixir yet, so it's different. I compare that to Kotlin. Kotlin was a language that was created around the same time as Elixir, but there is a huge company behind Kotlin, that's Google, and this Platform Attack, it's a quite small company when compared to Google. I think they have less than 100 developers there. And so the talks from the Elixir Brazil conference were not recorded. So all we have are the slides for some talks. Mm-hmm. And there is one guy that he did a personal recording of his talk, and I did a representation. I presented to myself the slides from that talk. So there are 2 videos from which with some content from the conference.
Awesome. So I do understand, like, as hosting a meetup and where people say, "Oh, can you have this one recorded and posted?" I understand the difficulty of making that happen. And so basically, if people want to get the incredible value of that Elixir community, it sounds like they need to go to the next Elixir Brazil conference, right? They're just gonna have to make that plan and schedule it and go.
Well, but the organizers, I wish to publicly thank the organizers, especially Alda Rocha and João Brito. They were great. It was their initiative, and also the Elixir user group from São Paulo. They did a great job. So I'm not complaining about that the talks were not recorded, but do you know that this was the second Elixir Brazil? Last year there was also an Elixir Brazil, and all the talks from the first Elixir Brazil were recorded, are available online.
I'll just say a quick thank you also. So for the community work that you've been doing, Alfredo, and also to Mark Ericksen. So Mark and I live somewhat close to each other. We're in sort of the Salt Lake City metropolitan area. I don't know if you can really call it a metropolitan area. I just looked it up online, and there's about 1.5 million people in the cities in and around Salt Lake. But over the years, there's been like Elixir meetups have kind of happened, and then sometimes they die down for a little while. And there's Mark in particular, but lots of other people as well have really pitched in to make that become a more regular thing. And I think that's been a huge benefit. There's probably, I had a list somewhere that I was compiling the other day. I think there's something like 12 different companies that I knew of around our area that are using Elixir. And I think a lot of that it is influenced by not only the wider Elixir community, but also the local Elixir community. So a big thanks to the organizers for Elixir Brazil, as well as wherever meetup groups are happening. I just thank you to everybody doing that kind of stuff.
Yes, regarding Utah, there was a guy from Utah there. It's Adam Tew. He works for Podium. It's in the Salt Lake City metropolitan area, right?
Yes. So there were two guys who came from Podium, and they did a rehearsal of their talk at our meetup. And they told us they were going down to Elixir Brazil. So we wish them luck. And hopefully it sounded like that went well. But yeah, so they were talking about their experience at Podium using GenStage and, for processing, very large amounts of messaging, like sending out notifications to phones and things like that. So it was cool.
Yes, one thing I would like to say is that Brazilians are known for being more extroverted or more informal. And there was one talk at this Elixir Brazil conference that was a stand-up, a kind of a stand-up comedy related to Elixir. Unfortunately, it would be impossible to translate into English, but it was quite funny. There was also one talk that one guy is Kaique. He was trying to give a demo of nerves, and he had a bucket full of water. And when the people in the audience clicked a button, then he was I don't know how to say, sprayed with water. And there's a video. So
wow.
there were some very funny guys there that they... one thing that I also wrote in my recap of Elixir Brazil was that I think that I as I said, I went to Clojure Conch in 2014. And I went there because I was going to the meetup in Durham, North Carolina. And then they said, we're going to give tickets to people that need tickets. So I said, I'm a professor from Latin America. Could you give me a ticket? And then I went because otherwise it would be quite expensive to me. But I think what the organizers from Elixir Brazil did was great. They invited a lot of people that even they didn't have had any previous experience with Elixir, but only they went there because they were part of how can I say it was a kind of inclusion initiative. So there were people that were there is a group from Perifa Code, that is people from poorer parts of the city, and also there is some black people from the tech community. So they were trying to attract more people to the Elixir community in Brazil.
Yeah, I really love that. I'm seeing more and more Elixir conferences do this. So I know Bruce Tate is another person. If any listeners are interested in diversity programs around Elixir conferences or the Elixir language, Bruce Tate, you can follow him at Red Rapids online. He's doing a lot of initiatives both at conferences as well as some other kind of online learning resources. So a great person to follow if that is something that you also want to get involved with and would like to help out with.
So I was wondering if we could turn the topic a little bit. You, with your academic research and your PhD, I understand that you had some experience with property-based testing. Is that right?
Well, actually, no. What I did during my PhD was I implemented a theorem prover. So it's kind of it has some relation, but it's all I know from property-based testing is what I watched I watched José Valim talk about property-based testing. That's I want to have some time to maybe in December to maybe pick some papers and read the book. There's a book about property-based testing from a known programming books editor, but I still don't have much experience. It's not that related to my PhD.
Do they both fall into that like formal verifications kind of branch of research?
Yes, it's related to formal verification, but what I did for my PhD was I implemented a multi-strategy theorem prover based on the KE Tableau methods. So it's not something that many people in academia or even in industry, people don't care much. So that's part of a PhD, that sometimes you choose a topic that no one cares. Maybe someone will care about it in 20 years. At Elixir Brazil 2018, José Valim gave a talk called Hughes-Driven Development. Why Hughes? Because of John Hughes, who is a researcher in a Swedish university. And I think it was fascinating because this guy, he wrote a lot of papers 20 years ago, and now José Valim is reading those papers and applying. Not only José Valim and the entire Elixir core team, they read his papers and other papers, and they used what they learned to create the Elixir formatter. So that's how research works. Sometimes you study something and nobody cares. Sometimes you study something and someone cares about it 20 years from now. So that's how I feel about what I did during my PhD. I don't know if at any time someone will care, but it's there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that talk by José Valim. So we put a link to this in the show notes. That is from his 2018 Warsaw, Poland, ElixirConf EU. And it's a keynote talk where it is called Hughes-Driven Development. And yeah, so it talks about the Elixir code formatter. And one of the things I think is just amazing, I just got to talk about Elixir code formatter, because I think even though I may not agree with all of the choices that are made in how Elixir code should be formatted, I just love that it's built off of the AST, that you're able to examine the AST and say, how can we restructure this code? And then verify that the restructured code does not modify the AST. So you're guaranteed that it doesn't break the code after it configures it. And I think that's such a cool feature of Elixir. And so anyway, that's one of the things I enjoy.
That's what Prettier does in JavaScript as well, right?
I don't know if it breaks it down to an AST though. Do you know?
I'm pretty sure that it does. Yeah. I think that's actually why it's I love it. I think it's fantastic on the JavaScript front. But yes, Elixir formatter is phenomenal.
I was talking with a friend the other day about Prettier, and he was saying, it's this massive project, and it's so amazing that they can do things like if a line gets too long, they won't just break it at the last character. They'll try to break it at the commas between the arguments, and like they really understand the shape of the code. And I was thinking in the back of my head, wow, that's amazing that that the Elixir core team released something that is it's right up there with Prettier in terms of its functionality and its completeness. The fact that it's very theoretically sound, and it's just a regular tool for our community. It maybe doesn't get the same kind of praise and attention that a project like Prettier does.
But it integrates into your editor more easily since it's a guaranteed substrate.
Yes,
anyway.
I think one tip I would have on that is we were wanting to recently add the code formatter to our project. And one of the difficulties is like you can set up like in your CI process, you can say, I want that if I run the code formatter as part of the CI build, and if it finds anything that it would change, then fail the build. It's just so you don't have to involve the whole discussion of how code is formatted as part of a code review. But the problem is then you exactly like Josh is saying there, you have to have it so everyone is automatically doing this. It's where it's automatically done. It's like, well, in order to do that, first we have to have a code commit that just formats the whole project. And then we can go from there. Otherwise, you're still going to have problems as you try and, merge changes with branches and everything. So you kind of get to that point where you say, okay, now is the time where we can introduce this as a baseline.
This episode is brought to you by Triplebyte. Applying to programming jobs sucks. You have to put the right keywords in your resume. You spend hours and hours on the phone screens and take-home projects, and that's assuming the company even responds to your application. Well, if you're a software engineer, Triplebyte can help. They work with over 400 top tech companies, from big names like Dropbox and Adobe to exciting startups. You do one brief online interview with them, and if you do well, you go straight to final interviews with the company on their platform. It's like the Common App for software developers. Triplebyte does not look at your resume or where you went to school. All they care about is if you can code. I've helped dozens of software developers with various credentials get jobs, and this looks like a terrific way for you to get in and get interviewed and get a job without a lot of the hassle and overhead. You can go check them out at triplebyte.com/elixir. That's triplebyte.com, byte as in 8 bits. As a special offer for listeners of this show, if you take a job through Triplebyte, they'll offer you a $1,000 signing bonus.
But yeah, I don't know. Have you guys experienced or done anything like with code formatting as part of your normal CI build?
Yeah, I think it's an important thing to do, and I also recommend having a single commit that just formats everything, because otherwise you end up with very confusing get blame. In my experience, there's always going to be a bad point when you do a formatting run, but doing it all at once is good. Anyway, yeah, you should have it in CI. It's awesome.
Yeah, I'll toss my agreement in there as well. Any of our new projects, I've been trying to make sure that I get that mixed format. I think it's like check format. In as quick as possible so that it's always running and whatnot.
Also, mix compile warnings as errors. Just do it.
Yeah,
that's a great pro tip. I'll just say, as maybe someone who, on a couple of my open source projects, I wanted to add the formatter, but when I tried to just run it across the whole project, it created some very odd formattings. And so just another option for people to consider is if you're bringing it into an existing project, you can actually in the .formatter.exs file, you can tell it which paths you want it to format or which files. And so I was able to say like, hey, I'm going to do one big commit that formats all the tests because there wasn't anything really crazy there, but then start to add other ones kind of piece by piece so that I could review, here's all the formatting changes. And sometimes you can personally fix some things that still comply with the formatter, but make the code that keep the readability a little bit higher. So just as I think most of the time, a single big commit and just bite the bullet can be a great way to just get the whole team bought in, like we're going to do this everywhere. But if you're working with a team that maybe you're not all in the same place or you don't all have as many hours in a week to work together, sometimes that longer latency relationship can benefit from a more piecemeal approach.
And you can run the mixed format on a single file. So if you notice, if you have a relatively small code base for this, if you do the full code base and a lot of stuff is kind of wonky in terms of readability now, you can just run it on individual files, kind of edit it, split up some functions, break things up, whatever, to make it look nicer, and then still mix format the same. So you can kind of do it even more piecemeal should you want.
Yeah, and I have a plugin that I had to disable until we can make that big change, but put it in VS Code for me. So just on save, it would automatically do the formatting. I think that something like that, and that exists for just about every editor, I'm sure.
Well, Adolfo, one other thing that I would love to get your opinions on is, are you seeing any projects that are going in as an observer participant? Are there any projects or initiatives that you see happening in the Elixir community right now that make you feel excited about the future of the language of the community?
Oh, yes. I Phoenix and Nerves and this. Mostly these two. I think what I can see from from my participation observing is that people are very excited about Phoenix and nerves, mostly. Yes, especially now that there's this Phoenix Live View. There's a lot of talk about Phoenix Live View. Yes, and I think José Valim said in the last Elixir Conf that the language is not going to grow much, right? It's kind like it's going to be stable. So I think the idea now is that a lot of things going to happen in libraries and frameworks around the Elixir language.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. And even in the libraries, I think the Nerves community is still putting out quite a few changes. But the main Phoenix framework in and of itself seems fairly stable over the last several releases. And they now have kind of some spin-off projects like FireNest, where they're trying to take some of the distributed CRDT stuff that they did with Phoenix Presence and turn it into a library that can be reused for other sorts of CRDT applications. And I think they're also extracting a few other pieces of things that they built for Phoenix in order to make the scaling story work or other things. And they're kind of pulling those out into more general purpose libraries. And then of course the Nerves community, as you mentioned, I just think it's that's one that I'm super excited about personally, and spending a lot of my time. Just over the weekend, I got some flower pots with moisture sensors and little fish tank pumps to pump water into them. I completely flooded them on my first attempt. So it was a nerves fail for me on my first go because I wasn't reading the sensors correctly. Luckily, they only had a 1 gallon tank of water, so I didn't do too much damage. But I think that whole area of bringing some very modern tooling, modern practices around resiliency, and bringing that to the world of embedded devices is it's going to be very timely for the fact that right now there's so many companies that want to create these more intelligent, more collaborative devices.
Yes, one thing that is happening right now here at my university is that I taught a course last year about concurrent functional programming, and there is this student that he works with notification-oriented programming. It's a kind of new programming paradigm that was created by a professor here, and so he knew this notification-oriented programming, and I presented to him Elixir and Erlang. And he said, "Oh, it's quite. There are some things that I could be doing." So in a few months, probably he will release this package where he will present how these two things can be connected.
Oh, and sorry, I just got a message from some of the other panelists that it looks like FireNest actually has been work on that has been halted, and they're actually moving that work back into Phoenix PubSub, which can be used outside of a Phoenix project. But thanks for the quick heads up there, Mark and Eric.
Yeah, that's a disappointment. I was really looking forward to FireNest as something I was wanting to use, but yeah, maybe we can catch up with some of the people who are working on that and kind of find out where things are going in the future. But yeah, so I'm just curious, Adolfo, in talking about concurrent programming and functional programming and object-oriented programming, if you just kind of, what do you feel are some of the benefits of functional programming, and like how do you present these kinds of topics to your students? Like where would you say that this, that functional programming might be a great example or a solution for any kind of problem?
Yes, first I would like to recap a little bit of my history with functional programming, because I was an undergraduate student back in 1991. Yes, 1991, and then a professor at the Federal University of Alagoas, where I was a computer science undergraduate student, he presented Lisp to me. So, but at the time he only does, do this with Lisp, but he didn't explain to me that it was a functional programming language. So I already knew how to program in Pascal. So I tried to do the same thing that I was doing in Pascal with Lisp. And some years later, I went to my master's, and there was a professor there, Rafael Dueiro Lins, that he was doing research with ML. ML is a quite old programming language, and but for me and for all the other students, except his students, it was, oh, this guy is crazy. He's doing something that nobody cares. Functional programming is useless. And so it was quite interesting to me that a lot of, it was maybe in 2011 that Bruce Tate wrote that 7 languages in 7 weeks book. And there was closure, and it's Lisp. It's Lisp for Java. Oh, that's great. So it's useful after all. So it's and so you know that José Valim, he read that book and he created Elixir because he liked Erlang, but he didn't like Erlang syntax, and he said this in a Brazilian podcast. He said, Erlang syntax is terrible, but I love the Erlang virtual machine. And so, yes, that was my... one thing that I forgot to say, that while I was in the US in 2014, 2015, I went to a lot of meetups, as I said. And in some meetups, someone would say, there is this new programming language, Elixir. The people also talked about a lot about Rust. Elixir and Rust, almost all meetups, Elixir and Rust. What's Elixir? Then, it was created by a Brazilian like me. So that's how I got interested in Elixir. And only last year, I think in 2017, after studying just a little bit of Elixir, I gave a talk for some students. And then I went to the first meeting of the Elixir Curitiba meetup. And last year, I gave a course on Elixir concurrent functional programming. And it was difficult for me to pack all the information about Elixir and Erlang and the actor model, and how do you teach a functional programming language for students that only know how to program with imperative and object-oriented language. And so I still don't have an answer. What's the best way to teach Elixir? I don't know. For instance, at there's this great site, obviously you know, Elixir School. Maybe someone of you is a contributor there, and they present anonymous functions before named functions. I don't know if that's the best idea. I asked Bruce Tate, and he also thinks that there is, he told me, no, first I do this and then I do that. So it's still an open question for me. If, for instance, I would like to know, would Elixir be a good first programming language for new students? If it is, which would be the best order of subjects to teach new programmers that want to learn Elixir? So that's what I'm thinking, but I still have I plan to do a course, to organize a course here in Curitiba with some students, but nothing concrete yet.
Well, I'm curious to hear from our panel their experience with that, because we deal with that from a very practical perspective of, we have a company that we work for and a job that we have to do, and we're hiring people who probably don't have any experience with Elixir. How do you guys go about kind of getting people into this functional perspective? Is there anything you do, like reference material you would use? Like, kind of where do you guys go with that?
So I was going to actually suggest this thing, and I've got the I'm just going to paste it in here. This is a thing that the National Functional Programming Group put together that was called Erlang School that Brian Hunter put on, and that's how I learned Erlang. And so it's not. I don't think it's necessarily like the best primer on this sort of thing for super beginners, but someone who knows what they're doing programming, I think it's a really solid trajectory. Anyway, and then there was also just if you're looking, there was, I don't remember the name of it, but there was an Erlang school like training that was put on. I know they did it in Nashville about 6 years ago. I forget who did it, but that was really, really well done. And it would be really helpful if I could remember the name of it so I could tell you, but I'll look it up.
So I have, I guess, one tip of what not to do to teach Erlang and Elixir. My first introduction to Erlang was at a Ruby D camp 6 or 7 years ago, and we did the game of life in it, and it was like 4 list comprehensions.
Oh god,
I have no idea what that did. So that put me off from Erlang for a very long time. And like, had we have not done that, like, who knows what would be different, but yeah. And as far as for the actual question, we typically have, the people who join Smart Logic typically are either JavaScript and like front end React stuff, or like Ruby knowledge primarily. So it's just kind of toss you into a Phoenix application. It's mostly the same. And then kind of the first thing I want to like show off is Ecto, because change sets are just like life changing. And so like once you kind of get hooked with change sets and like the pipe operator and whatnot, that kind of also helps you get in with immutable data structures and whatnot. So yeah, just kind of tossing you in the deep end and figuring out how Ecto works would be my tip for like if you already know a programming language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also don't have any experience trying to teach it as a first language to people, but I think the thing I've seen that looked most promising. So I'll post a. So there's a Pluralsight course called Meet Elixir. It's Jose Valim showing off Elixir. This was actually originally produced by another group that got acquired by Pluralsight. And so I saw it as kind of the standalone thing, and it's one programmer, and he just kind of shows a task of, hey, if I wanted to make a website that can stream things, how can I go through and get those little streaming files and start to parse out the information so that I can kind of show what resolutions are available and things like that. And so they just kind of walk through, and Jose starts off with just some .exs files. And so he's just kind of like shell scripting in a way. And it starts off very basic. And then and then it's like, okay, well, here's how strings work. And he introduces pattern matching, and he introduces the pipe. But it's very like the whole way through, you're very much grounded in, hey, we're trying to get to here. And we need to get to this level of output in order to get to the next step. And so he's kind of showing the very functional approach of like, well, let me think about this problem in terms of what does my input data look like? And if I can get the data to look like this, then I can do this with it. And then I can do that with it. And that very kind of data transformation problem solving approach. And when I saw that, that was very much one of the moments where I kind of was very interested in Clojure and a lot of other functional programming languages. And it very much pulled me into the Elixir community because I was so impressed by the practicality of saying, yes, let's think about the world in terms of data transformation, in terms of functions, but let's just make it extremely practical. Like, let's just solve a problem in the least amount of code possible. And the combination of those two thoughts was so attractive to me. So that's one that I suggest to a lot of people. It very much is aimed at people who know a little bit of programming already. And then another great one I think is Dave Thomas's Elixir for Programmers. It's kind of a video course. I think has like 12 chapters, costs $35 or something like that. And a lot of times when people are starting to work at the place I'm working at now, and they want to learn some Elixir, I'll just buy them a license and send them the link so that whenever they want to, it walks them through some of the basics of the language, but pretty quickly gets into message passing and actors. And that's a lot of times the biggest thing that's new if you're coming from another language.
Yeah, I think I'll just mention a couple ideas then, because I think of people's possible experience that they've already had with some functional kinds of things. And the ones that come to mind are like Lodash, JavaScript library. It's very functional in how it works. I really like that one. And also there is a immutable JS as a library, which is interesting because you start working with maps and lists and things, but they are implemented in JavaScript, but they are immutable. And I found that was really helpful with writing front-end JavaScript, like, React or Vue or anything like that, where I wanted guarantees about not accidentally mutating state. But yeah, so like as far as learning, I think I'll just mention it here. I'm currently in the process of building an online course for people specifically geared towards this idea of like, I already have some programming experience. I'm being brought into an existing team. I need to be scaled up quickly. And there's certain things that we cover in a lot of the books and things that aren't actually important for accomplishing that skill of becoming productive quickly. And then there's like, future courses will be things about how I take on some of those advanced concepts that are important, especially as you're architecting or you're leading a team and you need to understand it more in depth. But like for being someone who comes in and starts contributing, it's like there's a smaller set of things you need to know. So yeah, that's a course that I'll be launching soon, and hopefully I'll be able to mention that more when that's ready.
Mark, it's like you're opening the lid of your brain.
Yes, on Twitter I'm at BrainLid, which is that's the idea, right? It's like kind of like to share what I'm thinking about, and I'm open to new ideas. But that's funny. All right. Well, is there anything else we want to talk about or mention before we go to picks? All right. Let's go to picks. Josh, are you ready with one?
I am ready with one. It is a series of articles titled From Design Patterns to Category Theory. And it's just a very excellent, I haven't gone through it all, but I've read 6 or so articles so far, and that was enough for me to know I wanted other people to read it. It just goes through category theory sort of as associated with design patterns, or how you can think of it as design patterns plus, and it's really awesome. So that's all I've got this week.
Awesome. Michael, do you have one?
Yes, but now I can't stop reading design patterns to category theory. That's an amazing, this is like a book's worth of content easily. All right. So one of the things that caught my attention this week was a blog post by the Discord people talking about using Rust. So going back to the Adolfo's point about Rust and Elixir being hot topics. And so what Discord was doing is they have kind of the list of other people in your channel, and they wanted to, if possible, in a lot of cases, people are coming and going. And but if that person's not in the top list of people of your channel, then sending a notification down to your device is kind of just wasted bandwidth. And so they wanted to minimize that, but they needed this really fast sorted set implementation, and they ended up building one in Rust. And so I'm going to drop in a link to the blog post, but also I was really impressed that that they took the extra time as a company to open source the solution that they came up with. And so it's very much, if you're into like benchmarking and data structures kind of stuff, it's a very interesting read along those lines. I really get into that nerdy stuff. And also it made me want to pick the Rustler project, which is just a really great way if you are ever in a situation where you're wanting to do a lot of repetitive calculations or kind of statistical stuff where having more specific integer types can actually boost your performance quite a bit. Rustler is a really amazing project to be able to write some Rust and implement it or bring it into an Elixir project. And they do some pretty cool things. It has a lot of helpers for translating the types of data from Elixir into Rust and so forth. Anyway, I found it extremely compelling, and I just was really appreciative that the people who built Rustler spent the time to put that out, and then that Discord would not only solve their problem, but take the time to write a blog post about it and open source the solution that they came up with. So just big thanks to all those people.
Awesome. That is an awesome article and write up about that. And that was a resource I've also been kind of bookmarked as something interesting to use. Eric, did you have something?
Yeah, so I want to, I guess, last week, the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation kind of put out a Google Drive Sheets thing to try and bundle up all of the meetups kind of around the world. So I think it's a cool thing to, if you don't know that there's one near you, you can look at this and see if there's one close by, or to add yours that's local. I know Indie Elixir just got in recently, so that was fun, and also how I found out about this. So yeah, go check that out.
All right, and I was going to pick one. It's a non-technical pick. It is a video. It's a YouTube video about. It's called the Marble Machine Music, and it's just kind of this. What I love about this thing is, like, it is, people who are hackers at heart, and they just, whether it be in the physical world, and they're like saying, hey, can we make a wooden device with marbles that we wind up, and it makes awesome music, and we can throw these different levers, and it can turn on and off different instruments and things like that. I just think it's fun. I just love to see the fun that people have creating unique things in the world. So that's it for me. Adolfo, what do you have?
So I have 3 non-technical picks, 3 Brazilian movies. I used to be a great lover of cinema, but not. I don't have so much time anymore, but I still love movies. And these 3 Brazilian movies, there is this one, Aquarius, that it's about a woman that she lives in a building, and the people want to, how can you say, destroy the building, so that they can build a bigger one, but she doesn't want to leave the building. And so it's a great cerebral movie, but it's great it's with Sonia Braga. And Sonia Braga is also an actress in this other movie, that's the Kiss of the Spider Woman. She works there in this movie with William Hurt, that won an Oscar for his performance. And there is this other movie that's a little bit more famous. It's City of God. It's about slums in Rio de Janeiro. So these were my 3 technical picks. And my technical pick, it's because, as I said, I'm thinking about how to teach Elixir to people that don't even know how to program a language. Maybe we need something in the line of this book by my friend Ulisses Almeida. It's Learn Functional Programming with Elixir. I think it's a great book for beginners, although it kind of assumes that you know how to program in some programming language, but it's in the right direction. I think it's the book that I would use if I would. Of course, we have a problem here, is that many Brazilians can't read English. So maybe we need a book as good as this one by Ulisses Almeida, but in Portuguese. But it's a good start.
Awesome. Well, Adolfo, thank you for coming on and talking with us today. It's been a pleasure. If people would like to follow you online or get in touch with you with maybe any follow-up questions, where should they go to do that?
Yes, I'm mostly on Twitter at Adolfo NT. It's because my last name is Neto, but when I tried Adolfo Neto, it wasn't available anymore. So I just put NT, Adolfo NT on Twitter, and from there you can find links to my other pages. And I also have a blog on Medium. It's the same, Adolfo NT, where I post some things, some short, longer posts about the Elixir community.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's it for today. We hope you'll join us next week on Elixir Mix.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content